If you visit the Holy Land these days, particularly if you travel outside of the city of Jerusalem to some of the ancient sites of Nazareth, Jericho, Bethlehem, it's impossible to ignore the military checkpoints where new Jewish settlements border the Palestinian communities in the occupied territories. Your bus might pass through these structures that look like toll booths. In reality, they are also checkpoints where your bus stops and the Israeli military gets on board and checks your papers. As you drive along, you might see watchtowers with snipers. And as you drive out to the access point of the River Jordan, where you can step into those warm, muddy waters where John the Baptist brought the first message of a new covenant, you'll see warning signs saying that you should not go off the paved road because there are minefields. It's a strange thing visiting a place where the borders are so obvious, where the risks attendant to dallying in those spaces on the edge of difference are named so starkly. We have other places like that, other familiarity with border territories from other stories of history. Think, for example, of the demilitarized zone between North and South Korea. It's still a high-risk passage point. Few cross it. Despite the title demilitarized, military from both North and South Korea are visible, with something akin to a little footbridge between those two nations that nearly a half century later, after active hostilities have ended, are still technically at war. You may recall, I guess it was a little over a year ago, that President Trump and Kim Jong-un met on that footbridge. And watching video of that meeting, you get some sense of the nowhereness of that in-between space. Stepping into such a space, a DMZ feels risky. The side with which you are aligned cannot step in to protect you. The side with which you are not aligned sees you as an interloper heading in their direction. You are floating in nowhereness. And that is precisely the nowhereness that Jesus enters into in today's gospel passage. Remember where this passage sits in the whole arc of Jesus' story. He's just had another theological arm wrestle with the Pharisees, and the tensions are growing ever higher between him and the established authorities. So he gets out of town, so far out of town that he's in an area that is disputed land between Canaanite territory and Israel. It's a dangerous place. But for the moment, it's safer than where Jesus was before, until he is approached by someone who is exactly the wrong kind of person to interact with. An unaccompanied woman, a Canaanite woman. Canaanites were other, thought of as false followers of the one true God. Because of that, Jews classified them as Gentiles. And we don't touch Gentiles, we don't interact with Gentiles, right? But here's something that we may have forgotten. In the beginning of the Gospel of Matthew, there's a long genealogy, his whole family tree. And in that family tree are 3 Canaanite women: Rahab, Tamar, and Ruth. So perhaps this stranger, this outsider, this Canaanite woman, hails him as a sort of distant relative, a fellow member of the bloodline of the patriarch Abraham. Perhaps he sees her as a distant cousin of sorts, even though there are 1,000 reasons why he shouldn't interact with her. He is fully cognizant of her status as other. He's been patently clear thus far that his mission is to the Jews. That's going to change. But until now, it has been all about reclaiming and reframing the relationship between Creator God and the chosen people. She approaches him, begging for help. She calls him Lord, Son of David. How would she know that? But she does. She's desperate. Her daughter needs healing. But she is one of them, the other, not part of the mission. So he ignores her. And still she keeps at him. It's a risk for her too, crossing into this DMZ of Jew versus Canaanite. But her daughter. Maybe when you know you're really part of the same family, you're willing to risk anything if there's something you need. Maybe when you're desperate, you'll grab at the thinnest of threads of bloodline. The disciples, still disturbed by what happened earlier in the Galilee with the Pharisees, where they were called out for not following the law perfectly enough, want Jesus to just wave her off. But she's still at it, shouting for help over and over again. And he turns to her and says, in essence, "You are not my problem." You're not my problem, even if your foremothers were my foremothers. You're not my problem. I've got these annoying Pharisees to deal with. You're not my problem. I've got my hands full with the Jews, and they are my job. They are my mission. And in a moment that seems utterly and completely alien from someone who talked about leaving 99 other sheep behind to go rescue one, he says, it's not fair to take the children's food, what I am to bring to the Jews, and throw it to the dogs, non-Jews like you. She, being a relative, albeit a distant one, pushes back. I mean, relatives are more likely to do that than strangers, right? Even the dogs get the crumbs from under the table. I am your problem. I am. He steps back, shocked by her response, shocked perhaps by what had come out of his own mouth. And in that moment, he sees her. He sees her not as other, but as someone he loves. He acknowledges her faith in him and heals her daughter instantly. He sees her. There's a tendency, I think, for us to avoid seeing, to try to avoid that which makes us uncomfortable, to take on other people's problems. Our lives are complicated and busy, particularly now, and we're barely keeping our noses above the waterline. We've got our own issues. Job troubles, health concerns, worries about our children, marital stress, loneliness. Problems enough, right? That person begging on the street corner, not our problem. That trans person being tormented by teenage bullies, not our problem. The two young black men on the side of the road, their hands cuffed behind their backs as the police rifle through their vehicle. Not our problem. The Latina headed for her second or third job of the day, looking exhausted and looking over her shoulder to see if an ICE agent is there. Not our problem. Not our problem, not our problem, until they turn their eyes to us and we see the unspoken challenge that they dare not verbalize. I am your problem. I am. that which each of us has tolerated because we thought that someone else's pain was not our problem, is indicted. We are convicted, most especially when someone else suffers and we, in some way, have benefited. Because those human beings, those children of God, are our problem, as the Canaanite woman and her daughter were problems for Jesus to solve. A problem with these others that may have resulted from our own willingness to categorize another beloved child of God as other. We cannot live in the space of not my problem if we want to claim that we're followers of Jesus Christ. Even Jesus Christ, when confronted by someone who was not part of his original mission plan, responded by spiraling out from the tightness of that plan into something more expansive, more inclusive, more driven by the love in his heart. It's interesting, isn't it, that the only time that Jesus seems to have been bested in a theological wrestling match was by this woman. Oh, the irony. This Canaanite woman, a Gentile, unaccompanied, in the DMZ, crying out, nay, demanding help for her daughter. Her problem became his problem, and his heart full of love enveloped her pain and healed her. He saw her, and in that moment she was no longer other, no longer a problem. She was his beloved. Our responsibility in these painful times is to make others' problems our problems, not because we have any particular wisdom or skill, but just because Jesus asks us to see each other and to love each other. Because Jesus sees us and loves us, and in his eyes we are not our problems, we are the objects of his love. In this moment, in our DMZ of isolation, of illness, of racism, of poverty, of fear, look around. Whom do you see? Look at each other in this space of nowhereness. We are all each other's problems now. Or if we turn the lens and look through Jesus' eyes, those eyes of love, we are all each other's brothers and sisters and siblings in love, called to envelop each other in loving embrace. Troubles and brokenness may be our present trials in our DMZ. Some of those troubles and brokenness existed long before we walked into this space of nowhereness. But we are not without ways to heal ourselves and each other and this whole world. And so we name what is broken, who is hurting, and what must change. We name it. We see each other, and we begin the slow, hard work of healing, using the best gift that Jesus Christ has given us. Love, as Jesus loved. Just love. Amen.